What's good, friends? Thank you for tuning in to another episode of What's Good with Ebony Chappelle. I am coming to you with something transformational for your podcast listening and viewing pleasure. Okay, so today I have the distinct pleasure of talking with a fellow recorder alum, none other than Brianna Cooper. So I've talked about it on the show before, but I worked for the Indianapolis Recorder newspaper for about 4.5 years. Did a lot of different roles there. Toward the end, I served as editor. And it was a huge experience for me. And the paper and the people from the paper hold a very special place in my heart. So it's so exciting to talk with Brianna about her experiences, because she has a lot of them. So recently, Brianna transitioned out of the newsroom and into the State House. So I'm going to talk to her about that. Like, what is that experience like, going from covering the politics to being right up in the mix with the politics? Brianna has had some really great hits in her journalism career thus far. One of the standouts right now in my mind is the coverage of the Indianapolis Public Library. So in the city of Indianapolis, for those of you that are unaware, there was a lot going on with our public library, and there were employees. People are so rude. I'm gonna take that personally. But anywho, there were people that were black employees, queer employees that were feeling discriminated against. There was just a lot going on, and ultimately it led to the CEO not being the CEO anymore, and lots of thinking and discussion around what it means to hold institutions accountable. So Brianna covered that incredibly well. And now she is in a different space. So I want to talk to her about what it looks like to use those tools of educating the masses and inspiring change in a different form in her new role. I also want to know about what it's like being a white person working in black media, because the Indianapolis Recorder is a historically black newspaper, been around for over 125 years. And I just want to know, like, what was that experience like, being a white person working in that role? And it's not an anomaly, because the Recorder has had plenty of white people that have worked for the paper over the years. A lot of people might be surprised to know that, but that is the case. At one point in time, 30% of the readership was white. So it's very, very interesting how those dynamics play out in a city that has a lot to reconcile with when it comes to how we handle and acknowledge race and deal with one another. So without further ado, let's jump into my conversation with Brianna Cooper. I love your sweater. And are those Tinky Winky earrings?
They're aliens. But
Aliens. Okay. I don't know why my brain immediately went to the Teletubbies. Oh man, but that is so cute. I used to have these dangly flying saucer earrings, and I lost one of them, and I'm so mad because they were my favorite. My absolute favorite. It said something about, like, I know the truth, or something. It's something crazy, something weird. I don't know. But they were like my favorite earrings. So I like to start off every interview by just asking people what's good with them. So that can be anything that is making you smile, bringing joy to your life. What's good with, and is it Brea or Brea?
Brea.
Brea. What's good with Brea?
I'm settling into a new job. I've been there for a little bit over 2 months at the State House now, and it's kind of getting into the groove of things. So that's been a lot less stressful. Something that's been a lot less stressful in my life the last couple of weeks. So I'm grateful for that.
That's awesome. And I definitely want to get into that in a little bit. So give me just a second.
Okay.
Little pre-production situation there with tape in the background. I was trying to measure something earlier when I was recording. But anywho, so you worked in print journalism. You worked for the Indianapolis Recorder for a few years before transitioning into your new role. Before we backtrack into that, what is your role at the State House now?
I'm a press secretary for Indiana House Democrats.
Okay, awesome. So, talk a little bit about what led to you making the choice to transition out of that world and into the world of politics. So, going from covering the stories on that end to now being a part of, crafting and covering the stories in a different way inside the State House.
Yeah, it was a difficult decision. I was at the Recorder for 2 years, and before that, I had worked at other outlets and magazines, mostly as an intern while I was in college. But I always kind of envisioned myself retiring as a journalist, and that obviously did not happen. The biggest thing I think for me was some of the things that I covered at the Recorder, so COVID-19, the FedEx shooting. It impacted my ability to be unbiased in my reporting, and some of the political arguments surrounding those issues. So whether or not COVID actually exists, which it does, and gun control, it was difficult to kind of address both sides as if I felt they were equal. And so leaving journalism allowed me to be more vocal about those things and to try to impact change directly. And journalists do impact change, just to be clear on that, but just in a
Absolutely.
different
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Wow, that's deep. Because there is so much that goes into covering those stories. I mean, there's not only, for people that are unaware of what that process looks like, there's not only making sure that you have the facts as correct as you possibly can, and interviewing the people and crafting a compelling story. It's way deeper than all of that, because then you also have the personal impacts of
Right.
it. So carrying that stuff around with you sometimes. And it's like you try to separate, but sometimes it's really hard. And in your situation, the years that you were there, yeah, all that crazy stuff going on, it is incredibly hard, because it's like, it's irresponsible. Like, we've seen what it looks like when outlets, I'm trying to find the best way to put this, but when outlets basically give credence to certain dangerous points of view that
Right.
are completely incorrect. It's like, it's not even founded on anything factual. It's just someone's opinion. And unfortunately, that someone's opinion is in a position of power, but there has to be some sort of balance, to not giving it credence like it's something that needs to be respected as an actual fact.
Right.
Yeah. So how did you just manage as long as you did with that
Um,
being the case?
well, I had a really great editor, Oshia Boyd, who is now
Yeah.
the public engagement editor at IndyStar, I believe is her new title.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And a coworker, Tyler Fenwick, who is great. I was friends with him in college, so it was kind of weird but cool to
Wow.
work with him professionally.
Mm-hmm.
And so that helped a lot. Just I had an editor who not only was passionate about what she was doing, but knew a lot about journalism and how to get the best stories and make
Mm-hmm.
sure that we're covering things responsibly. And a lot of it was my own passion for journalism as well. It was really stressful, and there were times that I really wanted to kind of quit and go somewhere else just to get away from all of the craziness. But I just really loved what I did, and
Mm-hmm.
respected the the fact that people trusted me with their stories is something that I didn't take lightly, and I wanted to be there as long as I could to cover those stories.
Yeah, yeah. I deeply connect with that. Deeply connect with that thought process. There are so many different things I want to ask you. One, I want to jump into the fact that the Indianapolis Recorder is a historically Black newspaper.
Yeah.
You and Tyler are both young white people. What was it like being a white person working at a Black media outlet, especially during the time of COVID, uprisings, all the things? What
Yeah,
was that like?
it was eye-opening.
Okay.
I grew up in a predominantly Black and brown area.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of my friends as a kid and in high school were either Black or Hispanic. So the idea of systemic racism was not unknown to me. I mean, I remember, I've been in cars where we were pulled over and I, being the only white person, was treated much better than my friends were.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't like a shocking concept, but I think working at the Recorder and especially on a staff of 2 reporters, we had to cover each section, and seeing how deeply racism impacts every facet of life was eye-opening. It's something that even if you recognize racism is real and it impacts people's lives, I don't think a lot of white people understand how deep it goes.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it starts at birth in this country. I mean, in Indiana specifically, I think we have the 3rd worst rate for maternal mortality generally, and it's worse for Black women, and the same for
Absolutely.
infant mortality. I think we're 7th in the nation, 7th or 9th, I think, and again, worse for Black women and children. So, I mean, it starts as soon as you're born, and I don't think even well-intentioned and well-informed white people, I don't think that always connects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was definitely eye-opening in that regard, and I think too made me think about the questions that I asked or the stories that I pitched. I had previously done internships at Indianapolis Monthly, which is a great publication, but the audience is definitely a lot different, and you just had to think about connecting with your audience and making sure you're providing coverage that's important to your readers and insightful, which I think was difficult at first for me, trying to be insightful, working for a community that I don't belong to. Um, and that
Yeah.
was a learning process for me. And again, another instance where she as leadership really helped me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, having that good leadership in a newsroom is supremely important, and it's something, unfortunately, that a lot of people don't even have the privilege of having access to because of the way that newsrooms have changed over the years and gotten smaller and smaller. And a lot of times, you lose that institutional knowledge, and you lose that wisdom that is, gained through years and years of experience. You lose it when people aren't able to stay in the game because it's not sustainable. Like, it's not set up to, allow people to really stick with it for for extended periods of time these days. So that is extremely challenging. And one thing that I can say, for you and Tyler, like, for all the reasons that something like that shouldn't work, it absolutely works. And I think it is evident of the intentionality that you all like take into the work that you do, because so many things could get just lost in translation, coming from, worlds that are outside of what, Black people in Indianapolis face every day. So I just want to say that I appreciate the work that you did. One of the standouts that I was thinking about earlier today, thinking about talking to you, was your coverage of the Indianapolis Public Library, and what happened with the CEO. So that was like toward the end of your, recorder career and transitioning into where you're at now. That was a story that dealt very heavily with race. Like, it was, an unavoidable, like, key point of the way that things went. What was it like for you to cover that, and what do you feel like, what are some of your biggest takeaways from that experience?
Yeah, that was pretty much a year long series, which I did not expect that to happen
Mm-hmm.
with the first story that I wrote. Um, but essentially, I had written some stories on the library about their equity plan and when they started doing like curbside pickup during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of had a rapport with, the press contacts and some of the members of the board or in leadership. And it wasn't until people who worked at the library or previously worked at the library told me to check out the virtual, I think it was May of 2021, that board meeting where a woman named Brea, who is a former worker, was muted over Zoom trying to share her experiences with racism working at the Central Library. And from there, it just started I kept getting calls from people who had similar experiences and who wanted to share their stories. And the Library Workers Union, really did a lot of work to try to initiate change. And it didn't end. It's still kind of an ongoing process. But Jackie Neitz, who is the CEO, ended up parting ways, I think is how they worded it. And I think August of 2021, that sounds right. I think my biggest takeaway was just and it goes back to the fact that people were sharing stories with me that I could never experience. I don't know what it's like to experience racism in my workplace. And so building relationships with people who trust me enough to share one of their most vulnerable moments was really powerful for me. And I felt a great sense of responsibility to not just tell their stories, but make sure that I was being responsible and making sure that I'm talking to people on the other side of that, to make sure everyone has their voices heard. And it was definitely, I think that was my biggest takeaway, was just the importance of people trusting me and me doing right by them, if that makes sense.
That makes absolute sense. And I want to have you expound on that, with the thought of the importance of holding institutions accountable, especially institution like large institutions. So you would, built this rapport with leadership, and I've, worked with the library for many years and in different respects, and it can be a very pleasant experience. So to have that, confronted or disrupted by a different, different sets of information can be, a little jarring. But I want to have you talk about the importance of holding large institutions accountable for how they treat their people.
Yeah, and with the library, it was kind of odd, and I didn't really tell people this just because I didn't want them thinking I had a weird bias, but my parents both work in a library. They don't work in NDPL. And that's been the case since I was born. So I've grown up in libraries, and I've always loved going to the public library because it's such a great space, not just for checking out books, but just, during the pandemic, they help people apply for renter's assistance and unemployment. And it's an important space for every community. And that's why it's important to hold them accountable, because while they do amazing work, we have to make sure that everyone in the community is treated equally and has the same access to information and resources. And that's because I think one of the things that came up during that story series was people from the community kind of being like, well, it's just a library. I mean, this is bad that it's happening, but it's just, it's just a library. But people's lives are being impacted by what was happening. And it was just important, whether it's a library or a financial institution or a government agency, to hold them accountable for what they're doing and how they're treating people.
Yeah. And I laughed at the just a library comment because for all the reasons that you just shared, like it impacted people's lives, the people that were employed in a part of the library system, in addition to the people that relied on that system for so many things, because you have to know that if things aren't right internally, like it does impact policy. It does impact how people enjoy the space or don't enjoy the space, how they feel welcome and don't feel welcome, so it has so many different layers to it. So it's been very interesting to watch how that situation has unfolded, as well as the ways that it has given us, meaning people that live in the city of Indianapolis, an opportunity to, pay attention to other institutions. Like, okay, what are some other things that are going on that we need to pay attention to? Did you start to witness any of that, like more, I guess, scrutiny or more conversation around other institutions and what they had going on as a result of the library conversation?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm sorry, my timelines are kind of jumbled.
I mean,
But
time is whatever at this point. Yeah.
I can't remember what came first, but I know Newfields,
Mm-hmm.
Indianapolis Museum of Art, they had a job posting that went viral
Yep.
because, um,
Core white art audience.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so that that made its rounds, and I think ended up with the resignation of the CEO.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's something that's interesting to me that I wish I would have had more time to really expound upon at the Recorder was during the protests of 2020. All of these businesses and organizations made pledges to enhance racial equity within their organizations, and I'm just kind of curious to see what that actually looks like in 2022 if they follow through with that.
Yeah.
And again, with two people in the newsroom, some stories weren't able to be covered as extensively as we would have liked. But,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of promises were made during that time period, and I don't know how many were actually, followed through. But I do think that in the community, we're having more conversations about equity. I don't know that it's made its way to some of the organizations and institutions, but I think they're continuing to happen
Mm-hmm.
more
Yeah.
so than I ever remember them happening before.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the table was set for there to be more of that and be more intentional. And I agree with you. I'm curious to know how those pledges went too, because there was a lot that happened. Like it was at times it was just a little bit overwhelming because I'm like, okay, like you guys are saying a lot.
Mhm.
What is this actually going to lead to? So yeah, it's been a very interesting time. I think something else that has happened is which I pretty much was prepping for. Me and a lot of my friends would talk about the day where people get fatigued from trying to
Mhm.
be equitable because it was already like it took us this long and tragedy had to happen for people to finally be able to start having a conversation. So it's like, okay, um, at some point, certain people are just not going to want to keep doing it
Mhm.
because they're not used to using their brains in this way. Like they're not used to having to do this sort of work. And I know it probably sounds cynical, but it's like it's one of those things that I just kind of was like, it's inevitable, for that
Right.
to be the
Right.
case.
And if they don't
Yeah.
diversify their boards, then there's, no one really holding them accountable to follow through with those changes as well. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, because who's gonna be the board police? Like you just said, you would think. Well, not you would think, but in the past, a lot of times, the media was the ones that would do that. But newsrooms being small, people being stretched in a million different ways, it's kind of hard to stay on top of that stuff, which is extremely unfortunate. But I think it does create an opportunity for individuals, like regular everyday people, to kind of step into that role of being someone that educates their immediate community and communicates with their family members and friends and whatnot.
Mhm.
I really see that as being a thing that takes off more as the years go on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, in your new role at the State House, what are, I know you just started, so I'm not going to ask you a whole bunch of questions about that, but I am curious about how you might transition some of the things that you learned, especially about what life is like for Black people in Indianapolis, how you might transition some of those things into the work that you're doing with the Democrats.
Yeah, so we actually just had another woman start. So our like member assignments are finalized. So I work with quite a few
Mm-hmm.
members of the Indiana Black Legislative Caucus.
Great.
And so, and basically just a really brief rundown of what a press secretary does. I help with press releases or op-eds or just statements and facilitating interviews with members of the press, which is a really weird transition to like be sitting on a Zoom call, not as the reporter.
Mm-hmm.
So because I'm working with members from the IBLC, I imagine a lot of what I learned at the Recorder I'll be able to implement and to kind of pitch ideas that we should probably make a statement on this or do something to address these disparities in the community. We're still in the interim, and session doesn't start again until January, so it's kind of a weird part of the year is what I'm gathering from my coworkers, that it's kind of a bit slower. So I'm excited to see what happens when we start picking back up as session gets closer. But I'm also really looking forward to, like I was talking about earlier, making a difference in a different way and helping the people who are elected, help their communities and help their constituents.
Yeah. And you know what? It's so important because I get those communications. I'm in an area where, some of my representatives are a part of the IBLC. So being able to get those communications and know what's going on in the community, know what kind of, what their priorities are, is so important. And I try to encourage people to pay attention to that stuff because this is how you really know, and you're able to even hold our elected officials accountable because you know what it is they said they were going to do. You're paying attention and you're able to participate in the process in a really special way. And I think that's one of the things that I wish people would know more, is that you really can participate in this process and be a part of it and not just feel like things are happening to you.
Right.
Which we all need some sort of something to hold on to at this point to be able to feel like we're being impactful and influential and having some agency there. But I want to switch out of the journalism and work conversation and ask you about your hobbies and outlets outside of work. I think that's so important. I tell a lot of young journalists, like at the college level that I get to talk to, please find something that you're interested in outside of going to work.
Yeah.
Like, don't make it all about this because you won't be happy.
Yeah, it's very easy to burn out in journalism too,
Yep.
because it is a very demanding job and it's a very, you don't know when things are going to happen.
Nope.
Like I remember the first night of protests in 2020, I was literally home on I think it was on Twitter, and Indy 10 had a live video going on of them at the circle, and I was like, oh, there's something going on, and then that started like a 2-week long I'm home for 45 minutes at a time, a few times a day. So it's very, very important to have something outside of work that you can look forward to, because you might have weeks where you don't really have time off work. And in some ways, the pandemic was kind of beneficial in that regard, because I worked through the pandemic, but I wasn't going anywhere else or doing anything else. So I started making candles, which is like a weird hobby that started during the pandemic.
Has you ever done that before, or was it something completely new that you picked up?
It was something new. I think it was a video on TikTok maybe of a girl making candles. I was like, well, that looks like fun. And just tried it out. And it's relaxing. And I was able to dive more into reading and listening to, catching up on some local music that I didn't really have time for before. So that was the only silver lining of the pandemic. But I think it helped a lot of people kind of reset our priorities and find who we are outside of work, which I think is another issue that a lot of journalists have, is you're so tied to your profession that's kind of what you view as the most interesting thing about you. And it's really weird when you're no longer a journalist and you've had that mentality. So I would recommend not having that mentality.
Yeah, because it is it's a very weird transition to make when you're no longer that, and that had been such a huge part of your life. Like, I know that there were times at that part of my career where I was completely imbalanced. And then to not have that be like my identity anymore, I'm just like, oh, okay, so like, who am I actually? Like, what do I like? Like, relearning myself. So your point is well taken. Like, don't do that from the beginning, so you don't have such a huge shock to your system when that's not your life anymore.
Right.
Yeah. So I love the candles. And you so do you do a podcast? Because I thought I saw that too.
I do a podcast. Yeah, I do a
Yes.
podcast with my best friend, Kiera. It's called Murder She Watched, and we just review like true crime documentaries, which is another thing I got really into during the pandemic.
Nice.
But it's just a way for us to be kind of stupid and hopefully funny and talk about true crime. And we try to be more sensitive about the topics than some other true crime stuff that we watch.
Yeah.
Recognizing that it's still a person and a crime, but we're just kind of naturally kind of goofy. So we're not making jokes about the crimes themselves, but just so usually it's like detectives in the documentaries that we're poking at. But that's been fun. That's been going on for maybe 2 months now. It's relatively new.
Awesome, awesome. Well, that sounds very exciting, and I'm gonna have to check it out. I am not a huge true crime girl myself, but I enjoy things that are funny and irreverent. So that is enough for me. There's a girl I watch on YouTube sometimes that is a makeup artist, and she does her makeup while she's telling like a murder mystery thing. Have you seen
Oh,
that?
Bailey Sarian.
Yes, I'm pretty
I
sure
love
that's
her.
her name.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I really like that type of content because it's like, I'm not going to watch the documentary about it because it's based on a true story, which means real actual people did this. And I'm scared because I'm like, what if I meet one of these people? So, yeah, like my brain literally goes way too far and too deep with it. But the recaps, I'm like, I can do a recap, a funny one. I can do a funny recap. But yeah. So what else is going on with you, Brea? How can people stay connected to you and find out about what you got going on?
I probably spend too much time on Twitter. So you can find me at Brianna Cooper on Twitter. One thing that I'm really excited for, I'm hoping to launch it soon. I'm starting a blog on local music because that's really the thing that I miss the most from the Recorder, I think, is talking to local artists. So it's going to be called Circle City Sights and Sounds. And it's a Substack that it hasn't launched yet, but it will earlier or later this month. So I'm really, really excited for that and getting back into those conversations with people who are making Indianapolis a great place to live. That's something that I'm really passionate about. I myself am not musically inclined. So spending time with people who are is really fun for me.
That's awesome. And it's something that I know you have a connection to, but so many people in the city ask for that type of content because we don't have as many publications as we did before that even make space to cover those type of things because of lots of reasons. But yeah, so it's definitely a need, and to have multiple different perspectives talking about the great art that's being created. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that too. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Brea. It was so great talking with you today. I appreciate this conversation, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. It was nice talking to you again.
Of course. Take care.
Thanks, you too.
All right, Brianna, thank you for such an amazing, amazing conversation. I will drop links in the show notes to where you can connect with Brianna and learn more about what she has going on. You can connect with me at Ebony the Writer on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can check out my website, ebonychappelle.com. As always, have a great time, y'all, and a positive life.